Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 51. Trust Fall. Okay, so what's the drawback? Ivy asked him. What? The healing quirk. They always have a drawback. What is it? They elaborated. Damn it. Couldn't they just wait to get in the door to ask that? They were almost there. They were most definitely going to be knocked out for several hours at the very least, and they were not going to like that. Fatigue, he said after a while. Keep it vague. They just had to get in the door. He felt like he was setting a trap for a skittish stray cat to get them to a vet. The walk from the curb to the door felt like it was endless, and he may or may not have rushed them a little to get them there before Ivy could ask any more questions. Shota knocked on it as soon as it was within arm's reach. What do you mean, fatigue? Is this gonna knock me out? They pushed. Blessedly, the door opened before he was forced to answer that, but as the door swung open, he felt Ivy go as stiff as a board beside him. Before he could even stop them, they bowed, as low as their broken leg and their arms slung over his shoulder would allow. Recovery, girl! Thank you for seeing to this, they squeaked out. What the hell? Shuzenji whacked them on the shoulder with her cane before chiding them. Stand up, Sonny. None of that with a broken leg, she snapped, much more harshly than the sentiment required. Set up on the couch there. I need to grab some things. I'll be back in a minute, she said before walking off. The moment she disappeared around the corner, Ivy turned to him with a glare and whisper shouted at him, Why the hell didn't you tell me you were taking me to Recovery Girl's actual house? They demanded. What's the matter? What the heck is wrong with you? Did you hit your head too? He shot back with genuine confusion. What the hell do you mean? What does it matter? Recovery Girl is the most well-renowned rescue hero Japan has ever seen. She has more documented saves than any other non-combative hero in the world in the past 37 years. Why the hell didn't you warn me? They continued to whisper shout at him as they hobbled over to the couch. What the hell was going on? Were they actually freaking out because she's famous? Your leg has a complete fracture, and you're worried about making a good impression? He asked incredulously as he eased them down onto the couch. Before they could answer, Chio came back into the room with a glass of water and a few energy gummies, and Ivy slapped their hand across his mouth to keep him from talking as they shot her what he could only assume was a nervous smile if the way their eyes crinkled up was any indication. Chio just raised a brow and shot him a look. All right, let's see what we've got now. She raised her head. Would you hit the lights just over there? She requested. She started pulling at the laces of Ivy's boots, and they just sat there with their back ramrod straight. What the hell had gone into them? They were acting like a little fanboy at a meet and greet. Oh, Kami. They were, weren't they? Huh! If he didn't feel so bad about being the reason they were there in the first place, he would make fun of them. What an interesting tidbit of information. He filed it away for later. He turned on the light, she requested, and left his own shoes in the genkan. Once he'd gotten back, she'd already worked their boots off. Okay, we'll need to do away with the pants as well. Eraser, would you give them a hand? She instructed. He could see the kid panicking a bit at that, which was understandable. He was pleasantly surprised they'd gotten this far without much argument. They let him carry them down the fire escape. They agreed to get in Tsukashi's car and allowed them to take them to an unknown location to meet with someone they didn't know, all with a broken leg. They couldn't do much to fight back right now. Stripping them down any further at this point was probably a lot to handle. Just cut it, Shuzenji, he responded. Wait, now, they tried to protest. I broke your leg. I can buy you new pants, Ivy, he insisted. You did this? Shuzenji asked, shooting him a glare. It was an accident. They fell off the roof. I caught them by the ankle, and they swung into a fire escape, he explained. Ivy must really be freaking out. They didn't have anything to say about that. No assertions that they had everything under control or underhanded comments about him worrying too much. Shuzenji accepted the explanation and tottered off to get a pair of scissors. The room was silent after she left. I actually am sorry, Ivy, he admitted. They moved their near rigor mortis stiff posture enough to look up at him. They didn't respond right away. They just took a moment to study him as if they were assessing his sincerity. Well, I won't say it's all right, because it's not. It hurts like a bitch, but I would have done the same thing. It is your fault, but I don't blame you, they said gently after they determined he was being serious. If it makes you feel any better, I do have spiked shoes for the winter. I just didn't expect to have to break them out so soon. That did make him feel much better. He was already going to get them new pants. He didn't want to push a boundary getting them new shoes as well. They were already so skittish about the food he gave them. Shuzenji walked back into the room with the scissors, so he just nodded in response. The room was quiet as she snipped a line up their pant leg to just above the knee. The bone didn't break through the skin, but it was bleeding a little from the impact, and the whole length of their lower leg was bruised and swollen. Damn, that looked painful. Shuzenji eyed the injury carefully before she spoke. I'm afraid I don't have any morphine around here, but I have some less aggressive painkillers. They're still prescription grade, but not quite the good stuff, and I am going to have to set this before I can heal you, she warned. Oh, yeah, I figured. That's fine, Ivy said after a moment. They responded after a long pause, as though they didn't realize she was asking permission or even waiting for confirmation that they understood. That was troubling. All right, I should have had you take this earlier, she said. She shuffled around her supplies, pulled out a bottle, shook a few pills into her hand, and held them out to Ivy. They didn't reach out to take them, and they glanced nervously back over at him. It's just tramadol, dear. Is that all right? She asked, having caught on to their hesitance. She offered them the bottle as proof. It was a prescription pain medication, so it was reasonable to be hesitant of someone offering them that, but they recognized her. They knew she was a doctor, and they clearly held her in high regard, but they still didn't seem to trust her. Maybe they had a bad history with opioids. That didn't seem likely, but it was possible. There certainly wasn't a lack of places to buy that shit in the red lights, but then why did they keep looking at him? It's fine, Ivy. It's just pain medication. It's still going to hurt, but that'll help, he reassured. Apparently, that's what they were looking for, because after a moment of contemplation, they took the offered dose, slipped it under their mask, and swallowed it dry. Oh, dear. Did you want some water? Shuzenji offered. Ivy just shook their head. They looked incredibly uncomfortable, and not just because of the broken leg. Was it Shuzenji, or the pills? Or was it the whole situation? It was probably everything. He rarely saw them look so unsure of themselves. It was off-putting. All right, that should take a half hour to properly kick in. I really should have had you take that sooner. It slipped my mind. These are energy gummies. You should eat these too. My quirk draws on the patient's own energy to expedite the healing process. So, the more energy you have, the more I can heal you, she explained. Shota had a sneaking suspicion that Ivy already knew that, though. They gave an affirmative nod and slipped those under their mask as well. Right. Well, you've got water right here if you want it. Would you like a glass, dear? She asked, turning her attention to Shota. He shook his head. What about tea? Would either of you like some tea? She offered. Ivy shook their head again. He could tell that they were really freaking out, but they were hiding it well. He could only tell by the tension in their shoulders. They should give them a minute. Yeah, Shuzenji, that sounds good. Why don't I give you a hand? He offered, and stood to leave without waiting for a response. He ushered the two of them to the kitchen, but kept his ears perked up for any noise coming from the living room. Any movement or breathing, anything to show that the kid was either calming down or having a panic attack, but it was dead silent. Shuzenji gave him a questioning glance, but he just shook his head and kept moving forward. When they got to the kitchen down the hall, she spoke in a hushed tone. What's going on, Shota? I'm guessing this is the vigilante you've been working with. They're far more timid than I'd expected. Yeah, they are the vigilante, and they are acting off. They aren't usually this skittish, but I can see why they're uncomfortable. It's not an ideal situation to be in, but they recognized you. They were chewing me out for not telling me I was taking them to the recovery girl when you left earlier. They seem to respect you a lot, but I've never seen them so uncomfortable. I can only assume it's because they are giving us far more trust than they'd like to, but something just isn't sitting right with me about it, he explained. Chia started the kettle while Shota fished out some cups from the cupboard. Izuku was freaking out. No, they were Ivy right now. They needed to calm down. This was Recovery Girl. She wasn't going to hurt them. She gave them pain medication. She wasn't trying to hurt them. She wasn't sneering at them for being too fragile. She wasn't going to be like his mother. She wasn't going to be like the other doctors he'd been to as a child. She wasn't going to be like the school nurse. She didn't even know he was a null. Eraserhead said she could be discreet. She wasn't going to ask, and if she didn't, he didn't have to tell her. No, they didn't have to tell her. They were Ivy right now. They didn't have to tell her anything. No one was going to ask them. Eraserhead trusted her, and they trusted him, right? They trusted him. He wouldn't betray that trust. They had to believe he wouldn't. They took some deep breaths and tried to calm down, but whenever they managed to get it out of their own head, the pain radiating from their leg hit them again in full force, and they were stuck in an awful cycle of freaking out, calming down, tuning back in to the searing pain, and freaking out again. They kept going through that until they started to feel woozy. Damn, were the meds kicking in? How long had those two been gone? They had absolutely no idea what time it was. It had been somewhere around 1 to 2 a.m. when they fell, but they couldn't say how much time had passed since then. He couldn't remember ever feeling like this before. Surely he must have had pain meds when he was in the hospital for the burns he got as a child, right? He couldn't remember. All he could remember of that week was the pain and exhaustion, but surely the staff wouldn't have been so negligent as to not give him pain medication, right? It felt like they were dissociating, but they weren't. Their brain felt soupy. They were trying to hold on to thoughts, but they kept slipping out of their grasp. Oh, they did not like this at all. Their hands were shaking, and they knew they were panicking, but it was so distant. The pain had definitely abated. It was just as distant as everything else. Hell, this was worse than just being in pain. They were completely defenseless right now. Where the hell did Eraser go? Tea. He went to get tea. Did he go that way? They think he went that way. They couldn't remember. Not that it mattered. They couldn't check anyway. They knew where the exit was, at least. Not that that mattered either. They wouldn't get far like this. Damn. They couldn't get far like this at all. Was the door locked? They couldn't remember. Did Eraser lock it while they weren't paying attention? Where even were they? They were probably on the better side of town, right? It was Recovery Girl's house. She could afford the good side of town. They tried to crane their head to see if they could see the doors lock from where they were sitting, but the movement pulled on their leg and, yeah, that still hurt. Not nearly as much as it did before, but that definitely wasn't pleasant. Shoto was halfway through his cup of tea when he finished explaining Ivy's situation in depth. He'd mentioned them before when he had to explain why he came into her office with stitches covered in a heavily ornamented bandage signed by Ivy. He'd discussed the possibility of bringing them to her before to make sure she was okay with it as well in the event that they got hurt. But he didn't really explain more than he had to at the time. But she was curious, and they had some time, so he acquiesced. Yes, dear, that does seem like quite the moral conundrum. I'm afraid I don't have much more advice for you than what Hizashi's already said, assuming they're old enough to take care of themselves. They do look quite small. How old do you think they are? She asked. I can't say for certain, but they definitely seem to be able to take care of themselves, except for that brief stint over the summer. My best guess is late teens, early 20s. Or maybe that's my hope. I don't know. They're very skilled, and it has nothing to do with a quirk unless my quirk doesn't affect theirs. I think they have an intelligence quirk or something, unless they're hiding a mutation quirk that helps them with agility under that disguise. All evidence and logic point to that age range, but my gut's telling me they're in over their head. I really don't know. I have nothing to base it on besides their size, but I can't just shake the feeling, he admitted. She sat, thinking for a moment. A gut feeling isn't nothing, Shota. You shouldn't completely dismiss it just because it's not logical. Yeah, I know. He cut himself off at the sound of a yelp coming from the other room. He was up and out of his seat before Chio could even ask what was going on. Her hearing wasn't quite what it used to be. As he briskly walked into the living room, Ivy flinched away from him and let out another pained noise at the sudden movement. Hey, Ivy, it's fine. It's just me, he tried to soothe. It had only been a little over 15 minutes since Chio gave them the meds, but their eyes were already kind of unfocused, and they looked like they were panicking. He left to give them a moment to calm down, but that didn't seem to have helped. Their initial shock had abated now that they recognized him, but their hands were still shaking. The meds kick in, kid? He asked with a laugh to try to lighten the mood. They just nodded. Well, that's a good thing then. It's helping with the pain, right? He asked. They nodded again. Were they scared because of the situation as a whole? Or had they never taken pain meds like this before? Or was it both? Ivy, have you taken pain medication before? He asked. They shrugged. Well, damn. How had they broken bones, multiple if the way they phrased it was anything to go by, without ever having taken prescription-strength pain meds before? He sincerely hoped they just didn't remember. Okay, well, everything is all right. The meds are doing what they're supposed to. You just might feel a little woozy, but that's okay, he explained. They nodded and calmed down a little bit. before the sound of Shuzenji entering the room had them flinching again. Kid, it's okay. That's just Recovery Girl. You know her too, he reminded them. They relaxed again, but kept turning their attention over their shoulder at the door. Were the drugs causing paranoia? Or were they always this paranoid and the drugs just lowered their inhibitions? Chio was staying back and letting him handle the situation, but he felt like he was floundering. The door's locked, Ivy. If someone wants in, they'll have to kick it down, and I made sure no one followed us. Everything's fine. He attempted to soothe. They nodded again and visibly forced themselves to relax. Chio gave them a moment before speaking. All right, dearie. We really ought to get this done with before the meds wear off. Are you ready? She asked gently. They looked at her for a moment before nodding again. I'm going to have to feel around the break before I set it. But I'll warn you before I do anything, okay? She spoke just as gently as she approached them. They nodded again. It was eerie to see them this quiet. Usually they always had something to say. She started feeling around their leg, and they didn't react at all. Can you feel that, dear? She asked. They nodded. Does it hurt? They nodded again. She spared a questioning glance at Shota, but all he could do was shrug. This was all very strange. Ivy hadn't been acting like he would have expected them to since the moment he opened the front door. Okay, dearie. I'm going to set it in a moment, and then I'm going to use my quirk, and you'll probably fall asleep right after that, she explained, and Shota cringed. Ivy wasn't going to like that. He knew they weren't, so he waited for their reaction, but they didn't do anything but look back at him. The shake in their hands was getting worse, and he could see their chest moving as their breath accelerated. Damn it. He slowly moved closer to them, and when they didn't flinch away, he sat next to them around the curve of the L-shaped sectional. They didn't react beyond following his movements with their eyes. I'm not going to go anywhere, okay? You'll probably be out until morning, but I'll be here too, he assured them. They looked at him for a while before they nodded and finally took their eyes off him to look back at Shuzenji and nodded again. They looked so scared. They'd never acted so much like a child. I'm going to set it. Feel around to make sure it's set properly. Then I'm going to use my quirk and let you rest, okay? She asked for a final confirmation. When they nodded again, she continued, make sure you don't bite down on your tongue or mouth. 3, 2, 1. Ivy let out another pained yelp, but it was nowhere near as bad as the scream he heard when they first fell. They moved their hand and tangled it into the loose fabric on his knee. Before he could think better of it, he laid his hand over theirs as they focused on deep breaths. Shuzenji felt around the wound for a moment before pressing a kiss to their shin, and they immediately went slack against the couch. The tension that he didn't even realize was in his shoulders fell as they sank back into the cushions. After checking that everything was in order, Chio looked up at him and said, That kid seems to trust you a great deal, Shota. He didn't know what to say to that. He knew that they had to trust him to some degree, but tonight was a lot. They were so scared, and they kept looking to him like a lost kitten. It would have been adorable in any other situation, but right now it was bittersweet at best. You don't mind if we stay here till morning, do you? Of course not, dear. They're still not fully healed anyhow. I'll need to do another session when their energy is back up. Would you like me to grab the futon? She offered. He should really get it himself. She shouldn't have to lug the big roll out to the living room herself after he barged into her home at nearly 3 a.m. But Ivy's hand was still fisted in the fabric of his pant leg. They were so scared, and he promised them he wouldn't leave. It was stupid and selfish, but he found himself nodding anyway. End of chapter.